In celebration of this channel reaching over 100,000 subscribers, I thought it would be a fun idea to recap 100 of the best DIY projects. I seriously cannot thank you guys enough for your support and encouragement and kindness, and I wanted to do a little giveaway. So we are going to be giving away not one, but two $100 Amazon gift cards, and all you have to do to enter is be a subscriber of this channel and comment on this video before the end of the day on 9/21. And I'll be announcing the winners in next Sunday's video. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the very first project. For the first DIY project, we are going to make a candle wall sconce, and to do this I had an old tin lid that I was going to use as the backing, as well as a plunger stick that I picked up from the Dollar Tree, and also this PVC pipe that you can pick up at your local hardware store. I got mine at Lowe's for under $1. When you're picking up that piece though, just make sure you're getting the right size, because most taper candles are 3/4 of an inch in diameter, as well as this one fits perfectly on the plunger stick from the Dollar Tree. So now all I'm gonna do is take some super glue gel, and I'm just going to apply the smallest amount that I'm going to need to allow it to adhere to that tin lid. And now it's time to unify everything with a little bit of paint. So I went with this metallic oil rubbed bronze color, which was kind of the color of the tin lid already. And that really finishes off this project. Super easy and only a few dollars to make. For the next project is the jute doormat, and I had had such bad luck with bath mats recently, and I said the next one I buy is definitely going to be a jute doormat. And strangely enough, while I was at the thrift store, I found this Santa fabric jute doormat for just $2. And I think sometimes with DIY, we're so in the habit of thinking, what do I need to add to this to make it better? But you should also think of, what can I take away to make it better? So nothing against this Santa print, but I just really needed an all jute doormat and with nothing else added to it. So all I did was I just removed every little strand of fabric there, vacuumed up the excess, and I think it looks amazing. I still have it in my bathroom and it's worked out really, really well. Next up is the latched round mirror. I came across this giant mirror at the thrift store and it was only $12. It was one of those mirrors that had been attached to a dresser at some point. And usually I don't love the shape of those mirrors, but this one was just very simple and round. I liked the fact that it had a wood backing to it. It did have a little bit of damage that I tried to fix as best as I could, but the main thing I wanted to do was I wanted to give it a latched quality. So the first thing I did was I just removed that dresser component because it was just gonna be going behind my office chair, which it still is. And then also the other major thing I wanted to do was try to fix some of those blackened spots, which just happens over time to mirrors. The next thing I did was I just separated the glass mirror piece from that wooden backing. So I just did so using a flathead screwdriver, and then I removed all those little clips and I put them in a safe spot because I'll need those to reattach those two pieces back together. So for the latch component, it's just going on that wooden backing, and I got the latch off of Amazon. So I will link that in the description box down below for you guys if you ever want to do a project similar to this one. So basically all I did was I had the base piece that I was going to attach to the mirror, and then the other piece was going to attach to the wall just to make it feel a little bit more delicate. Now, because the mirror is so large in scale and heavy, this little latch would never be able to hold that up. So I did have to appropriately hang the mirror first, and then obviously the latch is just a purely decorative accent. With the latch now attached to the top and the D-rings attached to the back, I just wanted to shade in some of those scratch marks. So I just did so using some Dollar Tree wood markers, and I just did that all the way around. And to kind of disguise those black spots, I actually used this Looking Glass silver spray paint on the back of the mirror to see if it would kind of disguise it. And it did quite a bit. It's still not perfect. I still see them a little bit, but it is much better. And this is how the mirror turns out. For the next project, I wanted to make a stained aged vessel. I saw Emily Faith do this, so I will link her channel in the description box below. But basically, I just wanted to start out with a piece of pottery that I really loved the shape of. The color didn't matter at all because we were going to be changing all of that. So I loved the shape of this one, and it was just $4 at the Goodwill. So I started off by taking Magnolia's yarn spray paint, and I just gave that a couple generous coats, waiting about 5 minutes in between each coat. And after the color dried, I sealed it. I came back in the morning with some gel stain, and gel stain has a really interesting consistency. So I just took a little paper towel and I rubbed it all over the vase until I was happy with the amount of coverage that it had. I probably did 3 coats of gel stain, and then when I was happy with the depth that it had, I just gave a matte clear sealer over the entire thing before applying the mud mix. And if you're not familiar with that, you basically just take mud from outside and you rub it all over, and this is how it turns out. For the next project, I wanted to make a white berry and brown bow wreath, and it was inspired by something I saw on Hobby Lobby, but I didn't love a couple things. It was kind of small, and also it was $80. So I had a grapevine wreath that I actually got for free at a garage sale. So I thought, you know what, let's just try to make do with what I already have and see if I like it. So I took the grapevine wreath. I also at that same garage sale found these white berries, and basically all I'm doing is I'm going to attach these berries to the grapevine wreath. I did take out each individual sprig of berries and attach them individually because I didn't like that you could see all of that wire in front. And I just stuck each individual sprig in there. I didn't use any adhesive or anything like that, and I did leave a little room at the top for the bow. So while I didn't buy the wreath at Hobby Lobby, I did buy the ribbon. So I took the wreath over to the ribbon section and kind of color matched it. And the ribbon for that whole spool was under $1. So I thought that that was a pretty good price point. And I just basically tied it in a kind of slouchy bow and just did a dovetail at the bottom there. And I was really happy with this project. It only cost me a few dollars, and to be honest, I like it more. The next project is an all Dollar Tree project, and that is the checker print vase. So to start, I picked up one of the black sheets of the faux leather fabric as well as a white one. And basically what you're gonna do is just kind of feed one into another. So I wanted it to be primarily black, so I'm gonna make white strips of fabric, and those are what are going to be woven in between the black sheet of fabric. And as you can see for the white, I only made lines going across from left to right. And then for the black, I am making the lines go up and down with just one going across the top. And so I'm not going to cut the strips completely off. I'm gonna leave that band at the top there just because it makes it a little bit easier to weave everything through. Once I completed the pattern, I just added small dabs of hot glue and super glue gel where it was essential to make sure that that pattern stayed put. With the pattern now solidified, it's just time now to trim that excess off. And I just took a jar that I also picked up from the Dollar Tree, and I think this is a really nice way to kind of try out a trend without spending that much money. For the next project is some gradient canvas art, and one day I was at a thrift store and I found this art piece that had a floating frame and it was under $20, which I think is a really nice price point. And I just want to make some really easy abstract artwork for my son's room. So when it comes to gradient artwork, you want things to get either progressively lighter or darker. So I had 4 buckets set out, all with white paint inside, and then each bucket I added a little bit more than the previous bucket. All of the paints came from the Dollar Tree, as well as the brushes and the putty knife, which makes this a very affordable project. So I'm just mixing the colors around to get the right tone that I'm really looking for, making sure that it is in fact getting darker as we go on. And then hopping over to the canvas now, I'm just going to spread a little bit of paint onto the canvas, and then taking the putty knife, I'm going to kind of blend and fuse those colors together. When everything was said and done, I just sealed the canvas, and that I think is the trick to taking cheap acrylic paint to the next level. For the next project is a super simple IKEA hack, and that is to make an oversized woven lumbar pillow using the Sort Sew rug. So I laid the rug down lengthwise, and basically I'm just gonna fold it hot dog style, but making the back in the center of the rug, if that makes sense. With those pieces overlapping, I just added small dabs of hot glue all along that back side, and I just also then hot glued the end of one side so that way I would be able to fill the pillow. And because I knew I definitely did not have a lumbar insert this size, I decided to take stuffing from an old pillow that I wasn't actively using, and I just broke it apart repeatedly until the entire pillow was covered. And then I just simply hot glued the other ends together. And I really like how this pillow turned out. It's a really affordable way to get a high-end look on a budget. For the next project is some coffee filter wall art, and I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it actually looks really cool in that. So I grabbed a hula hoop from the Dollar Tree, and the first thing I did was I just peeled off that sticker that is attached around the entire hoop, and then I grabbed 2 poster boards also from the Dollar Tree, and I just placed the hula hoop in between both of those poster boards. I took the hula hoop and spray painted it white outside, and then I just simply added some duct tape to the back of the poster boards just to kind of fuse them together because one poster board wasn't big enough. But I needed something that I was going to be able to attach the coffee filters onto because obviously the hula hoop is hollow. So I just made some markings with a pencil so I knew I was going to need to apply some hot glue, and then I placed the hula hoop on top of that hot glue. And then now it was just time to fill in the entire hoop with some folded up coffee filters. And to fold it, I just basically folded it in half again, and then folded it one more time. With all of the coffee filters folded up, I just now need to attach to the poster board. So I just added a small dab of hot glue, and then I pressed the filter into the hot glue. So it's helpful to have a finger protector so you don't burn your fingers when you're doing this project. Then I just removed the excess poster board with some scissors and attached some 3M tape to the back of the poster board so I could put it up on my wall. For the next project is the faux leather tray. I had found this tray at a thrift store for just a few dollars. So the first thing I did was I just separated those pieces so that I could give it a really good cleaning. I think the previous owners of this tray used it to store some onions. So I just want to make sure I scrubbed it down really well and let that to dry. And with everything now clean and dry, it's just time to reupholster this bottom piece. So I'm taking this vinyl fabric that I ordered off of Amazon. Leaving a little bit of excess on either side is helpful when you're reupholstering anything, just to give yourself some slack, because you can always take away fabric at the end, but you don't want to run out of fabric in between. So I'm just adding staples kind of all the way around, and then I like to go in and kind of fine tune it, but this is how this tray turned out. For the next project is to make a leather rope ball. So to start, I have this 5-inch styrofoam ball sitting in my craft room, as well as an old leather belt that I wasn't using and some macrame cording. And those are really the 3 pieces you need to make this project. So the first thing I did was I removed a section of the leather belt that didn't have the buckle or the holes, and I basically just made a handle. I added some hot glue and I pressed those 2 pieces together. Then I took the sharp end of my scissors and I pressed down just to make an opening for that handle to sit inside of, as well as to start my macrame cording throughout. Before I hot glued the handle inside, I wanted to get the macrame started in that hole so it just looked more seamless in the end, and then I applied small amounts of hot glue all the way around until the ball was completely covered in the macrame cording. And as it was nearing the end, I poked a small hole at the bottom of the ball just to make sure that there wouldn't be any frayed edges of the cording, and it would just sit inside of that hole. For the next project is the branch headboard. A lot of you guys really enjoyed this project, especially when we were really in the thick of quarantine. So I had 2 of these floor length mirrors, and I basically just removed the mirror from the frame so I could place the branches inside of it. And while on a walk with my family, I grabbed several different branches and I brought them home. But before I attached them to the frame, I did give the frame a matte black coat of spray paint just to give it a more chic look at the end. And I collected all of these branches while on that walk. And the first thing I had to do was remove all of that bark. If I were to do this project today, I would have just soaked those branches in some warm water because it's so much easier to remove bark when your wood is wet. But I just at the time took a handheld little sander to remove all of that bark off. And then I just made little markings so I knew where the branch was going to exceed the frame. And I just took a little handheld saw. At the time I didn't have a miter saw, so this is what I used back then. And it worked out just fine. So I just laid them in the sequence that I wanted, and then I placed little numbers at the top so I knew which one needed to go first and which one was after that, and so forth. And then following that sequence, I just added small dabs of hot glue to either end of each branch, and this is how it turned out. For the next project is to make a 7-foot-tall fiddle leaf fig tree. I think so many of us have bought these fiddle leaf fig trees from IKEA. I myself have 2 of them, and rather than just donate both of these to the thrift store, I thought, what if I just can figure out a way to combine them to make exactly what I want? I basically just laid out a good sequence for this fiddle leaf fig tree. So I had 2 top pieces, so one thing I had to do was drill another hole, so then that way it was hollow on both sides and would slide through, so I would only end up with one top piece, if that makes sense. So I grabbed a planter and then I stacked both of the existing pots that the tree came with because it already had the cement, it already had a hole for my tube. So I just placed the tube that I picked up at Lowe's, and then I laid out the sequence of how the fiddle leaf was gonna go, because basically it's like a puzzle. These are little plastic pieces that connect to each other. So I just slid all of those pieces down on that metal tube and it fit perfectly. The next project is the Plaster table lamp, and from the Dollar Tree I picked up this foam tube that they sell around the spring and summer months, and I had a Hema light fixture that you can get at IKEA. So the first thing I did was I cut a slit at the bottom of one of the foam tubes, so that way the cord would have something to kind of sit inside of, and that way it would lie flat. The next thing I needed to figure out was the color, because I had tried just white paint and it wasn't really covering that foam as well as I wanted to. So I mixed some white paint with some plaster that I also picked up from the Dollar Tree, and I covered the entire foam with that material, and that seemed to really do the trick. I ended up doing 2 coats of that plaster and paint mix, and now it was just time to put our light through it. So there was a little gap at the top there because I think the foam tubing was also a little warped. So I just added some plaster to the top just to make it a little bit more seamless, and this is how it turned out. Very easy and very affordable project. Project number 15 is the reclaimed wood hooks. When I was at the thrift store, I came across this really interesting piece of wood for just 50 cents, and I really loved the vintage and antique quality of this wood, and I thought it would make the perfect backing for a set of hooks. So rather than try to kind of peel this rubber backing off, I just decided to glue it back on, and I love these really industrial looking magnetic clips that the Dollar Tree carries. I think it's a really affordable price point. It looks like it should cost way more than $1.20. $1.25. So I grabbed 4 of them. I took some quick measurements just to make sure everything was really evenly spaced out. And obviously because the wood is not magnetic, I couldn't use it for that feature. So I just decided to add some super glue gel to the back of each clip, and this is the end result. For the next project is a woven side table. So anytime I'm at a thrift store, I usually see this style of a side table, and it's just made of particle board, and usually they are really affordable. I think this one was about $2, and I decided this would make the perfect kind of base. It already has the exact shape that I want. It just does not have the texture that I'm looking for. So I grabbed a couple packs of jute cording from Amazon that I will link in the description box below. And basically we are just going to wrap this whole thing with that jute cording. I started off by just finding the center of the top of the table and just coiling it around using hot glue with every single wrapping. After the top was pretty much done, I decided to start working on the legs, and those actually went by pretty fast. As long as it was propped up, it made it go by so much faster. And once it got down to the end, I just snipped off the excess and added a small dab of hot glue. For the next project is the tray candle wall sconce, and this is a project I made when we were really in the thick of quarantine as well, and I had this tray that I had thrifted a while back, and then I found this corner bracket in my husband's tools, and I thought this would make just a pretty candle wall sconce. So I cut a cork down to the appropriate size and just attached it to the tray. I think it's a really fun way to add some interesting functional wall art to your home. For the next project is the wooden link object project, and I think that people either understand this project and they really get it, or they really don't, but either way, it's totally fine. I still really love this project. At the time, McGee & Co. had came out with these really beautiful wooden link objects, and I know now you can find similar things at Target and Home Goods, but at this time, that was just not available, so I decided I wanted to make my own. So I took 3 of these salad bowls, and I took my hacksaw. I just kind of set up a situation where they wouldn't be able to slide around, and I would have a good grip on the bowl itself, so I would be able to remove that bottom piece so that way they would be able to be connected to each other. With all of the bottoms removed, I just went in with my electric sander with some 220 grit sandpaper and removed that top layer so the stain would adhere really well to it, as well as I cut some small slits in 2 of the bowls so that way they could be interlocking. And for the stain, in this specific project, I chose to use Special Walnut, and this is how they turned out. I think it's a really fun way to incorporate a different material in your space and have it just feel really unique and special to you. For the next project, I wanted to make a pedestal side table, and to start, when I was at the thrift store, I found this huge Lazy Susan, and I thought this could definitely be repurposed and made into a table. So I had this old candle holder that was like about the appropriate height that you would need for a side table. So the first thing I needed to do before I attached anything was I used my electric sander and I just sanded the whole graphic off of that top piece. And while I was doing that, I noticed that there were these pretty heavy slits on the top. So I took some wood filler putty and just spread that in each of those slits using a putty knife, and then I sanded it down again. With that top piece now primarily prepped, it's just time now to add our base. So I just found the center and then I added a lot of E6000 to make sure that everything would adhere really well to each other. And then also to aid that process, I added a book with a 20-pound weight on top. And with the table essentially built, I could have stained the top, but I ended up just asking my husband to just seal it instead because I really liked the natural wood tone, and this is how it turned out. Project number 20 is the basket light fixture, and I had found this bowl basket at the thrift store for $4.99, and then I ordered a set of beads off of Amazon. And the first thing I did was I just measured around the section I would need to be able to fit a light fixture through the bottom of the basket, which would now be the top of the light fixture. So I just did so using some scissors, and then I just wanted to embellish it a little bit further, so I added some wooden beads around in like arch shapes using some needle and thread. I can link the beads that I used. If you want to see a more detailed tutorial of the sizes I used, I will link that video in the description box below. Project number 21 is a brass pedestal table. I had this black tray and I never found a really great use for it, and I had this set of candlestick holders that I also wasn't using. So I thought, why don't I just use one of these and make this a base of a little pedestal table. So again, using a wine cork, I just placed it inside of the candlestick, added a dab of hot glue, and then attached it to the bottom of the tray. And that's really the basic structure of this pedestal tray table. And based on coloring, I decided to go in with some Krylon metallic gold spray paint. If I was to do this project now, I would probably try to age it with some rub and buff a little bit as well. But I absolutely love how this project came out. It is something I still have to this day, and it was definitely one of your guys' favorites as well. Project 22 is a watercolor clock, and I had found this clock at the thrift store and it was in perfect working condition, but it was just kind of a little bit boring. I thought we could make it a little bit more interesting. I paid $5.99 for it. So the first thing I did was I just removed the back piece so I would separate the frame from the clock, and I just taped off all of the edges. I didn't want any of the paint or the watercolor to get through. After everything was taped off, I took some Apple Barrel white acrylic paint and I painted on top of all of the numbers so that way we would have the space for our watercolor painting. And I just took a watercolor palette from the Dollar Tree and I just had some fun. I played with some colors and I kept working with it until I was happy with the end result. And this is really just to give you the idea that you can put whatever you want instead of the numbers. You can get a graphic that you find online and attach it instead with some Mod Podge. But I think it's a really fun take on a really common household item. Project number 23 is all about restoration, and I had found this bench on the side of the road when I lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it was in pretty rough shape, but the bones literally were good. So I decided the first thing I needed to do was just sand everything off. The paint was chipping off and I just wanted to start with a clean slate. And I know that the bench was originally black, but I decided to try my hand at staining. So I'm using this one by Varathane in Special Walnut, and I took an old rag and I rubbed the stain all over the entire bench. But some of the sections didn't take the stain that well. So for those specific pieces, I added some brown paint to match, and this was the end result. I absolutely love this bench. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. I ended up selling it on Facebook Marketplace for $150. Project number 24, a very simple thing you can do to many different home decor pieces that might not fit your aesthetic based on color alone, is to just apply a coat of chalk paint. And I found this wooden box at the thrift store. I had just a little bit of chalk paint left over from another project you'll see later on in this video, and I didn't want to just throw the paint can away, and I wanted to give this box a second chance at life, right? So I just gave the box a quick sanding, and then I painted the box in this really beautiful olivey sagey green color. I ordered this hardware off of Amazon. Whenever you're applying some hardware, I recommend doing a little bit of hot glue or super glue gel just to kind of get your plate started, and then go ahead and add your nails, because the nails that went into this little hardware piece were really teeny tiny, and it helped to not have to hold that piece as well. Next up on my list is the Faux snakeskin pillow. Again, we were in the thick of quarantine when I made this project, so I had this faux snakeskin fabric that my mom gave me, and I thought this might make the perfect sort of like rustic chic vibe for my guest room. So I cut it down using these shears, and these shears are really just to prevent the fabric from fraying. So I will link these in the description box below. They are really helpful when you are doing fabric related projects. And I'm definitely not one that loves the sewing machine, but for certain projects, it really does make it so much faster. And I wanted this to be able to be something that would stand the test of time, which hot glue doesn't necessarily always do. So I just fed it through the sewing machine and I hand sewed the final edge there. And this is how it turned out. Next on my list are the wood round bookends, and this wood round I found at the thrift store for just $3, and I took some quick measurements, and I basically just wanted to cut it in fourths. So I had this little situation set up on some sawhorses with some clamps to keep everything nice and sturdy, and I took the circular saw and I cut it straight across in half. And with that half now left, I took another quick measurement and I cut that half in order to give me my two bookends. It was a really simple project and I absolutely love the way it came out. It is something I still have in my house to this day. Next up on this list is the grass cloth side table. My mom had given me this small little black side table, and I first just needed to kind of sand it down. That is a tip whenever you're working with contact paper. If you're able to, just give it a light sanding because it will help the contact paper stick a lot better. Initially, I was being daring and thought I should paint those rings gold, and then I quickly changed my mind and painted them back to black. So for the contact paper, I ordered this grass cloth contact paper off of Amazon, and it was very affordable, and I had seen so many grass cloth tables that were a pretty penny online. So I thought this was a nice way to kind of get that look for a whole lot less. So you just want to make sure that you're working in sections, and it helps, in my opinion, to kind of work diagonally so that everything kind of gets nice and smoothed out. And then whenever you're working with your corners, I say flip things upside down if you can, and then cut 90-degree angles so everything kind of folds nicely into each other and you don't have any lumps or bumps. If you do mess up, if you apply a little bit of heat to it, it'll allow you to kind of peel something off a lot easier and apply it back on the way you want it to. And just for a little bit of embellishment, I added these corner brackets that I also picked up off of Amazon, which I will link in the description box below. But overall, a very beautiful and easy project that you could do in an afternoon. Project number 28 is the aged wooden bowl. I had found this wooden bowl at the Goodwill for $2.99, and it was much more red in person than it's showing up on camera, and I just wanted to lighten it up a bit. So I took it out to the garage, I grabbed my electric sander, I sanded it down with that, and then a handheld sander for those tough to reach spots, and then I just finished it off with some oil that I ordered off Amazon so it would be food safe, and I absolutely love how this project came out. A really fast project and easy transformation you can do is to wrap any sort of cylindrical item that you might have in leather fabric. So I had found this leather fabric at the thrift store. I just cut it down to the appropriate size, and then I wrapped it around a Dollar Tree vase. And I think it just immediately adds a level of like masculinity and sophistication to an otherwise very basic item. Project number 30 is to repurpose a skirt into a pillow, and skirts are a really great way to do this because you already have your sides done. You just now need to complete your top and bottom. So you could do this with needle and thread, or in my case, I just decided to do some hot glue to make my life a little bit easier. With the skirt inside out, I just hot glued those sides together, and then for the top, I just added a little bit of hot glue on either side, so I was able to add the stuffing into the pillow. You could do an insert from Amazon if that's your preference, but I just decided to use something I already had, and it was a really easy project that took under 10 minutes. Project number 31 is the face silhouette planter. So I had taken a little planter that I already had. I believe I had thrifted it in the past, and I just painted it with some Farmhouse Black spray paint by Rust-Oleum, and a medium that I don't use a lot is clay. So I think I'm going to start using more of that because looking back on all these projects, I really think I should start incorporating more of that. So I basically just took the clay and I flattened it down, and then with a box cutter, I just made a face silhouette with the clay pieces. With those pieces to dry, I just hot glued them on to the planter, and this is how it turned out. Next up is the glass display box. So I had found this glass box at the thrift store, and it was really affordable actually, and it was in the perfect situation that I could customize it any way that I wanted to. So the first thing I did was I just taped off the glass and I stained the top of the box as well as the sides. The stain I chose for this project was Early American because I thought it complemented the placemat that I found really well. So I found this placemat at the thrift store, and I decided because it was a display box, it would be nice if the bottom of the box was something interesting to look at. So I took some wood glue and I attached the placemat to the bottom of the box and applied some weight to it, and I let that sit for a little while before I removed the excess of the placemat. And there were just a few of those little slats that had came unraveled when I removed the excess, so I just applied those back on with some additional hot glue. For the next project, I wanted to make a faux ceramic jug, and to start, I'm going to take this bottle of Fireball cinnamon whiskey, and the first thing I needed to do was just remove all of like the labels and the packaging so my bottle is prepped and ready to begin. So I ended up using Henry's Feather Finish, which is basically like a cement or concrete like substance, and you just basically want it to be the consistency of like pancake batter by adding water to the powder. So I rubbed that all over the entire jug and let that sit overnight, and then I came back in the morning and I sanded it down so there weren't as many like rough or rigid spots, so that way it was prepped and ready for paint. So I loved this bowl that I had picked up from Target. It's by the Studio McGee line. So I kind of wanted to get the coloring of that bowl and place it onto this jug. So I messed around with some paints that I had on hand. Now I used some cabinet paint. I also used acrylic paint. I just used things that I already had, and this is how it turned out. So I hope this inspires you to just use your stash and to be creative. Project number 34 is to make a stone paperweight, and to start I found this stone in my backyard. It's important that your rock kind of sits flat and flush to a surface, but that it kind of has like a tapered top so you can add your hardware on top of it just to give it a more finished look. For the hardware, I ended up using this drawer pull that I had left over, adding some E6000 to the inside of it and then placing it on top of the stone, and this is how it turned out. Project 35 brings me to the bust table lamp. So to start, I needed to find a table lamp that I could use the top piece of that lamp so I could connect it to a bust instead of this rooster here on the bottom. So I ended up finding this rooster lamp at a flea market for $8. I safely removed the rooster, set it off to the side, and then I cut the electricity from the lamp and I removed that top components so that way it could just go right into the bust, which I ended up ordering off of Amazon. So I will link that bust in the description box below. With the top section of that lamp removed, I needed to figure out a way to attach it to the inside of the bust. So I grabbed this special drill bit that drills into resin, which is what this bust is made of. And once that hole was then created, I was able to kind of have a place to sit that structure on top and inside of the bust. I added just a little bit of super glue gel just for added securement, and then this is kind of how the bust table lamp turned out. Definitely a fun project and one that I would recommend to you all if you have very anthropology inspired style. The next project is super simple as well, and that is just to make a popcorn tin upcycle. I buy these every year for Christmas, and they're perfect for storing large amounts of popcorn, and then after they're done, I like to give them a new life, so it's good to just give them a couple coats of some spray paint. I used some gloss leather paint here, added some hardware to the top, and there you have it. I use it to store all of like my bandages and band-aids and things like that in my bathroom. Next up on this list is the two-toned coffee table. I had found this coffee table on the side of the road, and it was actually in really good condition. So I decided this was going to be a perfect, just totally cosmetic upcycle. So I just sanded down the top part of this table, and I decided the bottom was going to be in a matte black, and the top I was going to stain. So when it comes to painting things with this many slats, it's better to just work in small sections because otherwise you'll end up with a lot of drip marks. So I taped off the top piece so I wouldn't get any black paint on there, and then I just worked in small sections until the entire bottom of this table was covered in black. And then once that dried, I just stained the top wooden piece in one coat of special walnut stain, and this is how it turned out. For the next project, I think it's always a fun thing to do to upcycle like an old box that you just have lying around and make it purposeful, so you could stick like cards or something like that in there. So I had this box left over from Christmas, and I mixed some acrylic paints that I had on hand until I got this like mauve-y pink color. Again, I took some hardware that I had on hand and I applied it to the top of the box using some hot glue. And I love doing projects like these because I'm just taking things that I already have but making some useful functional decor. Project number 39 is to make a paper mache inspired vase. So to start, I had an empty bottle of apple cider vinegar, and I'm just going to give it one coat of white acrylic paint so that way the spackle will adhere a bit better to the glass jar. So I ended up just doing one coat of spackle first all over the entire thing, and then I went in with my colors. I wanted it to be this sort of like brownish tan color, so I just blended those two colors together with the spackle and then blended it all over the jar, and I basically just lightly tapped my finger onto the spackle to give this sort of faux paper mache effect. And I really like how this project came out. It was really fun and definitely one I recommend trying. Project number 40 is to make some stone bookends. So I went in my backyard and I found two rocks or stones that were similar in size so they could function as bookends. And I just wanted to spruce them up a little bit and add some gold leaf to them. So gold leaf is a really affordable but messy substance to work with. So just forewarning there, you want to lay something down because this will get absolutely everywhere. So I added a little bit of Mod Podge to the rock, and then I would apply a little bit of the gold leaf onto the Mod Podge that I just placed. And this is one of those trust the process projects. It's going to look really crazy at first and you're going to like question if you're doing the right thing, but then you just sand off the part of the gold leaf that doesn't stick to the rock, and it actually has like a really fun and cool effect. Project number 41 is to make a carved wooden hanging planter, and I had found this wooden bowl with this like cappus shell liner on the inside at a thrift store in California. So I threw it in my suitcase and I took it home with me, and I thought this would make the perfect base for this project. So I picked up some reindeer moss from Dollar Tree and I first filled the bowl with that, and then I needed to figure out a way to get it to hang. Because this bowl is actually kind of heavy, I wanted it to be really secure, so I pre-drilled some holes for the screw eyes to be able to be screwed into, because they wouldn't screw into this kind of wood just independently without those pre-drilled holes. So after I added the twine to the screw eyes, I just tied a knot to the top, and then just to burn those like little fibers, I just took my lighter carefully and I just took it to the twine, and this was the end result. Really beautiful, and I think it fits in really well with my inspo piece from Antler. Next up on my list is to make some Antler shelf decor. So to start, I had this scrap piece of wood out in my garage, and my father-in-law had given me a whole box of antlers to work with, which was super sweet. So I decided I was just gonna kind of pop that on top of the wooden piece. So I wanted to just paint the antler a nice, like bright white color and just attach it, so there was a bit more contrast between the color of the antler and the wooden piece. So to do so, I just added a little bit of hot glue where I knew that those two pieces were going to meet, and I popped it on top of the wooden piece, and it was a really easy, really fast project that I still have to this day. Which brings me to number 43, which is to make a geometric plant stand. I found this sort of like exposed lantern at the thrift store for just $1, and the first and only thing I really needed to do for this project was just to remove that candle piece. And I have found the easiest way to remove metal that you can't just remove with like needle nose pliers or wire cutters is to use a hacksaw. So I just hacked away until that entire thing was almost being able to removed by pliers, and I was able to just snip that metal off. And with that piece completely removed, now I have the space for a planter to sit inside of, but I ended up liking this planter that I found at the Goodwill. I did the whole paint and mud mix trick, and I stuck some scrap florals that I had in my stash, and I actually really love the way this project turned out. I still have it in my home to this day. Project number 44 brings me to the faux wood magazine holder. So the first thing you'll need is an empty box of cereal and some contact paper. So I just removed the top flaps from the cereal box before I got started, and then on the shorter sides I made some markings. I cut those markings down, and then I connected where those cuts were made, so I had a nice diagonal straight cut. With the shape now created, now it's just time to add the contact paper. I personally just found it was easier to kind of just roll the cereal box into the contact paper instead of cutting out each individual side from the contact paper and applying it to the box. So after I did that, I was just able to kind of remove the excess, and I had something that looked like this, and I think it's a really easy, really fun project that literally anybody could do. For the next project, we are going to make some wall sconce shelves using some scrap wood that I had from my old house in Maryland. Now this was an existing shelf, and I basically just cut it into 4 sections, 2 being smaller, 2 being bigger. And basically what we're going to do is just have the smaller piece of wood sit perpendicular to the longer piece of wood. And to do that, I just took 2 screws and screwed it in from the back. I didn't have the ability to do pocket holes at the time. With those pieces now combined, it was just time for a little bit of paint, so I took it out to the garage and I gave it a couple coats of some white chalk paint, and then this was the end result. Anthropologie, I would say, is known for having some gold leaf wall decor pieces, and they can be functional where they have like hanging frames from them or they hang jewelry from them. And I came across these at my local thrift store for just $1, and I thought this might be a nice way to try to get that look for less. So all I did with these is I basically just connected them with some black zip ties in the center, and then I tried to maneuver the leaves around the zip ties just so you wouldn't be able to see them as much. And that really wrapped up that project. If I was just going to do it for a jewelry holder, super simple and only cost $1, then the second way was to take some prints and place them in some frames, hang them from a chain, and then attach those chains to the gold leaf wire. And really simple project. And if you have a very Anthropologie inspired style, I think this would be a nice thing to look out for at your thrift store. For the next project, we are going to be making the Antler candle holder, and I made this a few Christmases ago, but I still put it out every fall, and it was inspired by something I had seen on Pottery Barn's website for just about $100. And basically, I just took 2 antlers that I had in my little stash, I hot glued them together so they could kind of encompass the hurricane vase from the Dollar Tree, and there you have it. For just a few dollars, I was able to create something that looked really similar to the Pottery Barn version, but definitely on a budget. Project number 48 brings me to the Plaster pillar column table. So to start, I grabbed several pool noodles from the Dollar Tree, as well as this tube here I found at my local hardware store, as well as this wooden round. The first thing I needed to do was apply this tube to the bottom of the top of this table. So I found the center doing some quick measurements and added some super glue gel to give it a nice secure hold. And then I placed the tube where I placed the super glue and then let that sit for about an hour or so until it started to really cure. And while that was drying, I cut each foam noodle in half, and then I cut it down to the appropriate size, and I hot glued each noodle onto that tube that I bought from the hardware store. With everything now glued down, it's just time for some paint and plaster. I mixed 1 can of chalk paint with 1 can of plaster, and I applied that mixture all over the entire thing twice. When it came to the top, I really just changed the direction to which I was painting so you couldn't really see any of the wood grain. I filled in any spots with additional plaster, and that really wrapped up this project. The next project brings me to our Cork display box. I had so many of these Cork placemats that I wasn't doing anything with, as well as this gift box that I had left over from Christmas. So basically what I wanted to do is just wrap this box with this sort of Cork material. Cork boxes are weirdly expensive, and I thought this would be a nice way to get that look for less. The first thing I did was I just flipped the box upside down and traced out how much I would need to cut off in order for the top to be covered. And then I wanted to work on the sides because this cork specifically had a little bit of weight to it. It's not like the cork from the Dollar Tree. So I wanted to make sure that the sides were going to accommodate the existing side, but then also the top piece that I now created. And I just repeated that process until the entire box was covered with that cork material. And of course, you know me, I had to add just a little bit of hardware. So I just had some leftover corner brackets from other projects, decided to pop those on as well, and then this is how it turned out. Project number 50 brings me to making some large-scale faux driftwood. So I picked up this branch in my backyard, and it was quite large, and I thought this might be nice for some shelf styling. I took it to my miter saw and I cut it down to the appropriate size that I was really looking for. I put it in a large bucket and filled that bucket with bleach and baking soda and salt, and I let that sit overnight, so that way all of those kind of substances would work together to really lighten up this wood quite a bit. After I was done, I ended up with something that looked like this, and I was really happy with how much it really lightened up and almost made a grayish tone of the branch that I had picked up from my backyard. And I think it's a nice project to try, and it's essentially free. Project number 51 brings me to the melted wax art. So I took an old canvas that I wasn't currently using and I painted it with some Mod Podge using a chip brush. And if you're anything like me, you have candles that are just almost burnt down. I don't know what it is, but I have a problem burning down that last little eighth of every single candle I own. So I just decided I was going to make use of it and I poured that wax all over this canvas. The reason I added the Mod Podge was to kind of create some adhesion between the canvas and the wax, because I kind of felt like the wax would just eventually break or peel off without it. So that is why I did that. After I spray painted it white, I just hot glued the corners to a Dollar Tree frame, and it was a really easy and fun project and a unique take on some abstract artwork. Project number 52 brings me to the distressed jug vase. So I found this large jug at the Goodwill for $4. I'm pretty sure all of their jugs are priced at $4, which I'm not mad about because that is a major savings for me. And I started off this process just by painting it in this sandstone color by Krylon. I will link it in the description box below. It's the perfect neutral and it gives a really nice just kind of like base for your projects. So the next thing I'm doing is just rubbing some Dollar Tree moss just to give this sort of like green shadow that I think just makes it look that much more authentic. And then for this case, I wanted to take some watered down dirt instead and just kind of rub it all over so it wasn't so thick like it was with the brown vase. I wanted it to be much more subtle, and I love the end result of this project. I still have it in my bedroom to this day. Project number 53 brings me to the framed antler. So I made this for fall last year, and basically I just took a canvas from the Dollar Tree as well as an 11 by 14 frame from the Dollar Tree and an antler that I already had. I hot glued that antler kind of to the center of this picture frame, and because I wanted mine to just be really monochromatic, I took it outside and I just painted it all in a matte white chalk paint. And I love this project. I think it's a really subtle way to incorporate animals into your home without it feeling overwhelming. Project number 54 brings me to the bamboo wall hanging. So to start, I had lots of magazines lying around, and I think the imagery in magazines sometimes is so beautiful. So I picked out the pictures that I liked the most using a box cutter. I just cut out those pages so I would be able to kind of arrange them in the way that I really wanted to from my bamboo stick that I found right by my house. So the other things that I needed were some twine so that I'd be able to hang it from the wall, as well as some thread. So I just attached the thread by just making a small loop around and then pulling the thread through that loop, and then I just attached those pieces to a clothespin, and the clothespin would then hold the picture. I just repeated that process until the bamboo stick was pretty filled with clothespins, and then I just arranged the pictures in a way I thought looked nice, and that is kind of the end result of this entire project. So I think this is a nice project if you're on a budget and you have a large space that you need to fill and you don't know what to put up there. I think this is a nice option. This next project is not even a project, but it's something that I needed to include just to show you how easy it really can be. I found this tortoise cup at the thrift store for 25 cents. I took a Dollar Tree pillar candle and I put it in the cup, and I have seen things that look like this at West Elm that cost 20 times the price. I would say artwork is one of those things that either really speaks to you or it doesn't. And if you are on Anthropologie's website, for example, and you see this ballerina picture and you love it, maybe next time go to the thrift store, look for a ballerina book or a ballet book and see if you can find some really nice imagery that looks similar to what you really love from Anthropologie. That's like my biggest tip. When you're at the thrift store, try to find inspiration from the stores that you love and kind of jot it down in your phone so you kind of know what to look for. For the next project, we are going to be making a macrame side table. So to start, from the Dollar Tree, I grabbed a pizza pan as well as one of these clear chip bowls that you can find in like the party section. And I added some super glue to the bottom of the trash bin and placed the clear bowl on top of that. And then I just wrapped the entire thing with some macrame cording, and I started from the bottom. And basically, I just worked my way up to the top. I want to point this out. At no point am I cutting the macrame cord. I'm going until it either runs out or I finish the project. Once the entire thing was completely covered, I didn't want to add the top until I was able to finish the bottom piece. So for the pie pan, I started at the bottom and I left it independent until that piece was completed, and then I combined the two macrame pieces together at the end. And this was the end result, such a sweet little table on a budget. Again, this is one of those projects people understand or they don't. I like incorporating some just sort of like abstract objects in my house. I think it kind of gives your space a nice mix of materials. So I saw this prism on Anthropologie's website for $58, and I saw this at the thrift store, and I'm thinking I paid 25 or 50 cents for it. And all I did at first was I just sanded it down until it was pretty smooth, and then I spray painted it in a navy blue so the undertone was correct. And once that paint had dried, I took some gold leaf metallic gold paint and I painted over the entire thing. So just a little bit of that navy was coming through, and I think this is a really good way to kind of dupe a project without spending a whole lot of money. For the next project was one that you guys really liked as well, which was the dual candle holder. So I'm taking one of these foam wreath forms you can find at the Dollar Tree, and I'm basically just going to cut it in half using a serrated or steak knife. With that step completed, I needed to kind of fuse those two pieces together in a way that would make sense and give it some stability. So I took this little tool here. It kind of melts styrofoam and plastic, which makes Dollar Tree projects a breeze, honestly. So if you do a lot of Dollar Tree, you should get this. I'll link it in the description box below. I added some hot glue as well as this little metal tubing here just to give it some structure, because I actually tried this project in the past and I didn't have that, and it wouldn't hold the weight of the candles. It just toppled right over. Now for a little bit of paint, I ended up just getting some black paint and some brown paint, mixing it with some baking soda, and then I painted over the whole thing twice. Also, I do want to mention I used that same tool to melt the hole in between to melt the holes for the tapered candles, and this is how it turned out. Project number 60, I wanted to make a gold leaf vase. So to start, I'm taking this bottle that I had here, and I grabbed one of those tubes that you can find at your local hardware store, as well as a couple sheets of some gold leaf. So I'm taking a little bit of Mod Podge on a paintbrush, and I'm just applying the gold leaf all over, sanding it down. I also spray painted that cap piece the same kind of gold color, and then I super glue gelled that onto the top of this bottle. And then I just sealed the whole thing. I placed some greenery in there, and that really finished off this project. Another Dollar Tree project I wanted to make was something I made this past spring, which was this lavender wall pocket. To start, all I did was I just snapped those black clips off of the back because I didn't want you to be able to see those, and then I just hot glued the glass into the back of the frame. And one of these pockets you can find in like the back to school section generally. I think they're meant for lockers, but I'm sure you could put them anywhere. And I just spray painted that with some metallic gold spray paint, but I didn't like that that was so gold and the frame was not, so I just decided to distress that and just dry brush on some acrylic black paint just to make them match a little bit better. And essentially now all I need to do is fill it with something. So after I super glue gelled that piece onto the glass, I was really inspired by something I had seen at Target, and I like that they always do a lot of variation in florals. So I mixed two of the florals from the Dollar Tree, and this was this entire project. It was really easy to create, and essentially you can change the mood based on the florals you put in here. The next project is to make a jute trivet. So to start, one of these foam wreath forms from the Dollar Tree is probably one of the best crafting things they have. I took that same melting tool from earlier projects. I melted a small hole big enough that I would be able to slide this jute cording through it, and I just hot glued that around. And I hot glued the entire jute around until, again, either it ran out or I finished the project. I don't like cutting jute. I would rather just take the time and uncoil things, because I think that when you have a lot of frayed edges in your projects, it just looks like a DIY project. And again, I had one of those drawer pulls left over, so I hot glued that to the front of it, and I think it looks really similar to the one that I saw on Studio McGee's site, but for a whole lot less. Now for an IKEA hack for you all, the wood round side table is probably my most recreated project from you guys on Instagram, so I'm gonna share it here again. All you need for this project is this IKEA bar stool that has like a plastic top to it and a wooden round that's bigger than that. So I found this wooden round at the thrift store, and then I was just trying to decide which screws I wanted to use, because I wanted the screw to obviously be big enough to kind of go through the bottom of the stool, but then also not through the top of the wooden plank there. So altogether, this project cost me under $9, and I still love it to this day. Project number 64 brings me to the tile stone hurricane vase. I think the hurricane vase might be the most DIY'd thing from the Dollar Tree, but I thought this was a fun take on it, so I wanted to share it again. So I basically just took these spare little tiles I had left over. Now, if you don't have tiles like this, I would suggest maybe doing like a plaster over some dominoes or a stone spray paint technique and attaching them that way to get a similar effect. So I just took some super glue gel and I attached each individual stone onto the bottom of the hurricane vase, and it actually held up extremely well. I was worried because these stones are really heavy. It's still holding on in my daughter's room to this day. Project 65 brings me to the woven rattan light fixture I made using an IKEA placemat. So to start, I took the Hema light fixture from IKEA, and I needed to figure out how much from the center I was going to need to remove in order to feed this light fixture through it. So after I figured that out and I was able to kind of push those two pieces together, I now needed to think about a couple things. The first thing, when your bulb is this exposed and everything is so shallow, I needed to make sure that my light fixture, my actual light bulb, was cute, because it was obviously out in the open for everybody to see. And number two, I needed to figure out if I wanted to hang it hanging down like this one shown here, or hanging like more like a sconce, which is what I ended up doing. So to hang it like a sconce, like this Lulu and Georgia one, I ended up just getting a little hook to hang on the back. So then that way the actual fixture would just sit inside of that. And yes, you do see a cord, but I kind of like that. I think it makes it feel a little bit more industrial that way, and it's worked out really well. I love this project, and I actually moved it to my mom's house. Number 66 brings me to the white stone links. I ordered these foam rings on Amazon, but you could find something really similar at the Dollar Tree. And all I did was I took the white stones from the Dollar Tree and I just hot glued each individual stone around these two kind of like interlocking foam rings. To make them interlocking, I just cut one of the rings in half, and then I slid it around the other ring, and then I reattached that ring together, and I just embellished them with all of those little white stones that I found at the Dollar Tree. Super fun project, and I still have it to this day. Another Dollar Tree project I made were some scratch vases. So in the party section, you can actually find really like nice shapes for a lot of home decor pieces. So all I did with these is I grabbed these set of 2 clear bowls, and I just hot glued them together, and then I hot glued the last one on top, and then I just decided we were going to make this sort of McGee & Co. inspired scratch vase. So to start, I actually went with a light blue color and a chip brush, and I mixed that with a little bit of baking soda just to thicken it up a bit and give it a more like ceramic appearance, and I painted it until it was completely covered, and then I went over it after it dried with a sort of like navy color, but I still wanted the light blue to show through a little bit. So I was able to kind of just dry brush it on there, letting that light blue poke through ever so slightly, and I think it had a really pretty effect, and it did look really similar to the one from the Studio McGee website, but obviously on a budget. Project number 68 brings me to the branch floor lamp. This was an IKEA hack that I made using a tree branch that I found outside. I basically just pulled the bark off and cut it down to the appropriate size, and I mixed it in some cement. And if you ever need something to sit upright, I recommend just taking some pieces of scrap wood and screwing those together so you get your positioning correct. Once the cement had hardened, I just needed to remove it from that plastic bucket that I used as a mold, and then all I had to do was just kind of weave that light fixture from IKEA around the branches and all the way down to the bottom until I was able to plug it into an outlet. I personally love a really good rustic moment in my space, so this was definitely that for me. Project 69 brings me to making some DIY watercolor art. I'm definitely no professional, and I'm new at watercolor as well, so I think that taking advice from someone who doesn't have a lot of experience sometimes is the best way to start. So I order my watercolor paper off of Amazon, and I just use the palettes that the Dollar Tree sells. Now, I initially did use their brushes as well, but they just shed way too much, so I opted to buy better brushes at Michael's that I will link if I can for you guys. My 3 major tips when you are doing watercolor is to first find an inspiration image that you really enjoy on maybe your favorite home decor site, or maybe on Pinterest, Instagram, whatever it may be. Find some inspiration from that so that you can apply it to whatever you're doing. Also, I think it's helpful to have something underneath of what you're working on, underneath your watercolor paper, so you can kind of like get your colors correct before you apply it to like your finished product. And then my 3rd tip is just to water the section that you're working on your paper first before you start applying the paint, because when the paper is just slightly damp, it applies way better. Which brings us now to project 70, which is the ceiling candle holder. I first started out by going to the hardware store and grabbing these PVC cap ends that were 3/4 inch in diameter. And I also, from the Dollar Tree, grabbed one of these wire plant hangers. And the first thing I'm doing, I'm taking some needle nose pliers and I'm just bending up those sections that typically you would hang the chain from, just so then that way the caps would have something to sit on top of. After I was able to bend those back flat enough that the end cap would be able to just sit right on top of it so that the candle would be nice and straight, I just applied some super glue gel to the bottom, and then I clamped those down and I let those sit for about an hour. Once those had kind of solidified, I took the bottom piece outside and just gave it a couple coats of some black metallic spray paint, and then I did end up removing one of the links from each chain so it would actually have something to be clipped onto, because when I didn't do that, I felt that it was just a little bit too wobbly, and obviously with like lit candles, you want something that's going to be really nice and secure, so I just did that one little extra step there. Which brings me to project 71, was the modern sculpture object. So to start, I had some scrap wood from my stash and I decided that was going to be the base, and I just measured it and I found the center. Then I took this object that you can find during springtime at the Dollar Tree, and I chose the appropriate drill bit I would need for the base of this little object to be able to sit upright, obviously with the help of a little bit of adhesive, but I almost made like a sort of oval shape at the base there, so that way it would be able to sit nice and upright. Now I know in this project I'm using hot glue, but that didn't actually end up holding up, so I would definitely use E6000 or super glue gel if you're gonna do a project like this one. And then it was just time for a little bit of paint, so I decided to go with this metallic black spray paint by Rust-Oleum, gave that a couple quick coats outside, and this was the finished product. Project 72 brings me to the faux leather purse planter. So I had this old purse that a zipper was broken, so I thought I would repurpose it. Again, this is when we were really deep into quarantine and everything was closed. I literally couldn't get supplies, so I was just trying to be super resourceful and using the things that I already had. And I basically just took the inner liner out of that purse, and then I just cut down some old cardboard boxes to the appropriate size, just the bottom and the sides, so it wouldn't be so floppy. I wanted it to be a little bit more structured. So I hot glued those inside of the bag, and then also I took the strap that was initially like a shoulder strap and I just wrapped it around that top piece there and hot glued it to the back, and that really finished off this project. Which brings us to project number 73, which is the curtain canopy. It was an IKEA hack that I did using the Lil curtains, which are really affordable curtains at IKEA. So to start from IKEA, I picked up one package of the Lil curtains, and then from the macrame cord, I cut 6 strips that were each 9 feet long. So once I folded those strands in half, they then became 4.5 feet long, which was enough so that I would be able to basically do some quick macrame and tie it in a knot at the top. Instead of just taking the macrame cords and just gathering them and taking them up to that top knot, I did decide to do some quick square knots. And in order to make a square knot, you need to be working with 4 strands at a time. So over to the right, I'm gonna give you a more close-up view of what that really looks like. But you basically have 2 strands that you're working with in the middle. You're gonna make the number 4 with your furthest left strand, and then you're gonna take your right strand and pull that through that number 4 there, and then you're gonna pull that tight, and then you wanna finish off your square. So you're gonna repeat that process, but now you're gonna make a backwards 4 using your right hand and your right strand, and pull your left strand through that backwards 4 and pull tight. I repeated that process for all 3 groupings of macrame cording until I gathered one large knot at the top. And once I was able to do that, I took additional macrame cording and I just hot glued all of that macrame cording just so it was more like unified. I just wrapped that cording all the way around that big loop. With the macrame now completed, it's just time to put the embroidery hoop back together, and this really finished off this project. Project 74 is to make some hydro-dipped organizers to give them almost like a faux marble effect. So to start, I have a large bucket filled with water, and also I'm taking some white matte spray paint, and I'm just spraying the top of the water, and I'm going to take a paint stick and stir that around. And I'm going to do this for the black container. And I'm just going to simply dunk that container in this water. And then you want to simply flip that organizer around the other way, add some more paint, stir it around, and dunk the other side. So then that way everything is nice and filled out, and you get this like really cool pattern. I think it looks really cool, at least, and you can do this with any color. Now I've seen people do this with nail polish, and every time I've tried it with nail polish it doesn't work nearly as well, so I would recommend doing the spray paint technique. Number 75 brings me to making a 3-wick bowl candle, and during the spring and summer months they have this really pretty like blue floral pattern at the Dollar Tree, and I actually really like the shape of these little bowls. So all I did was I took some permanent marker and I made 3 little markings at the bottom of the bowl so I knew where I was going to need to place my wicks. I actually heard from you guys that it's better to microwave whatever container you're about to put hot wax in first, so that way your candle doesn't like ripple or have like a little lip at the top. After I was able to melt the 3 Dollar Tree candles down and retrieve the wicks, I hot glued the wicks to the spots that I had made, and I just put them with some straws. I actually probably wouldn't do the straws right now. I would probably do the kebab sticks. I think those work a little bit better from the Dollar Tree. The straws just really didn't like hold as well as I wanted them to. And then after the wax was totally melted, I just simply poured the hot wax in the now warm bowl with the wicks out of the way, and I just let that to dry. After the wax had dried, I just needed to trim the wicks down, and I think this would make a really good gift idea as well, but definitely a project I recommend and one that I really loved. Number 76 brings me to the linen wrapped books. I think this is a really great project if you have a lot of books at your house, and this is more for the books that maybe you don't actively read because you now won't be able to obviously see the title. But if you have some like linen-y looking fabric and some old books that maybe aren't in the best of shape, this is the perfect project for that. So I have these old books that I wasn't using. If they were really brightly colored like that Portuguese dictionary one, so many of you guys have asked me, yes, I am 100% Portuguese. My parents are from the Azores Islands. That is why I have this dictionary, but it wasn't in the best shape and I obviously still want to keep it. So I decided to paint the cover white, and then I just wrapped it in this canvas fabric, and I absolutely love how these books came out. I think they look so much better than the previous. Project 77 brings me to my industrial light fixture makeover. So at our old house in Maryland, we had this ceiling light fixture, and I just really did not like it. It was just way too traditional for my taste. I'm not like a big silver person, so that obviously needed to change, and I really did not like the shades either. Those like bell shades just scream traditional to me, and that's not my aesthetic at all. So instead of changing out the whole light fixture, I just opted to spray paint it black, and then I placed a little order on Amazon. I got really aesthetic Edison bulbs that looked way better, and then also I picked these really modern shades to go around each canister, and they fit perfectly. And I think if you're not savvy to any sort of like electrical work like I'm not, this is a really fun way to kind of like enhance your space, make it feel more like you, but also not have to maybe get your hands in something that you don't really know what you're doing and you don't want to get hurt. So definitely something I recommend to you guys. But one thing I do regret not doing on this project is just removing the additional links that I also spray painted. I didn't even know you could do that at the time. So now in our current house in Ohio, we know better, and we have definitely since removed links that are unnecessary. Next up is to make a fun dried floral vase. So I grabbed one of these agate pieces. I don't know if the Dollar Tree still sells these, but if they don't, I would just take a scrap piece of wood and attach 2 dowels to that wood piece. I ended up obviously just removing that agate piece anyway, so it's really just the base that you need for this project from that. And then I also grabbed a foam wreath form and I painted it black. I did the whole baking soda trick just to thicken it up a bit, which is a really great hack to do, especially when you're painting styrofoam. And then after I made 2 holes at the bottom so that it would just sit inside of that foam wreath, and I just added small dabs of hot glue so it would be nice and secure. I also added a hole at the top so I could stick some dried florals that I found outside, and that really wrapped up this project. It was super easy and fun to create. Number 79 brings me to making a faux leather repair tape vase. So grabbing a hurricane vase from the Dollar Tree, I had this cognac faux leather tape, and basically we are just going to wrap this around this hurricane vase. I know I already showed you guys a faux leather project, which is great, but I actually prefer this version because there's no glue required. All you have to do is start at the bottom, making sure that you are keeping everything super straight, and it's kind of like a contact paper project. It's you know, if you mess up, you just peel it back and no damage is done to the vase in the making of this project, which is great. And you just kind of keep layering the tape on top of the previous layer until you get to the correct height that you're really looking for. And like I said, if you know you mess up, you can just peel it back and start over. And I think it looks way more chic this way, and definitely a very easy and beginner DIY project. A maybe not so beginner DIY project was the mid-century shoe cabinet. We had this shoe cabinet for a while, and it's a very popular one from IKEA, but the main thing we wanted to do was change the color, remove that kind of like glossy typical IKEA finish, and the legs. So as you can see, my husband took the circular saw just to level it out. We just wanted to add some mid-century legs to it. So after we removed those kind of peg square legs, we grabbed some scrap wood. After we took that scrap wood and cut it down to the appropriate size, we kind of wanted it to fit snug underneath the shoe cabinet so that these mid-century legs would then now have the space to be able to be accommodated. So in order for that scrap wood to be set in place, we added these brackets that connected the shoe cabinet to that scrap piece of wood. And then I simply just followed the instructions given to me from these mid-century legs that I ordered on Amazon. So I will link those below for you guys. And once the sort of like reconstruction was done for this cabinet, we just needed to prime it. Whenever you're painting IKEA furniture, it is so important that you prime it because otherwise your paint will just kind of have this sort of like runoff effect. So priming it with a good primer is really important. And then I chose to do some chalk paint, and that's where this paint can originally came from. That's the one I have had a little bit left over to do other projects with. And I just chose to do this color because it was nice and neutral, and I think it just fit the vibe of my home very well at the time. And I love how this project came out. Definitely not the easiest project of the bunch, but I think definitely worth the time that it took. Project 81 brings me to the hula hoop wall shelf using a Dollar Tree hula hoop and some scrap wood that I had on hand. So I removed that sticker from the hula hoop, and then I also removed the beads, and then I hot glued the hula hoop back together. In order to connect our little mini shelf to the hula hoop, I needed to drill holes on either side of the scrap piece of wood, as well as holes on the inside of the hula hoop, so that way I could stick something like a dowel, or I think I actually used a kebab stick broken down to the appropriate size, and I just hot glued that in place. If I were to do this project now, I probably would do E6000 or super glue gel just to make sure it was like really secure, but honestly it did stay placed with the hot glue. So then I just decided to paint the hoop black. I stained the wood with special walnut, just one coat, and then I hot glued the shelf in place, and that was really the end of that project. Super simple, very straightforward, and I think you get like a fun industrial look on your wall. Number 82 brings me to making a sculptural faux stone candle from the Dollar Tree. So I grabbed 2 candles from the Dollar Tree, as well as 2 glass bowls that you can find in like the kitchen section. And I just hot glued the bottom of these bowls together so you had like a fun kind of sculptural moment. And then I was pregnant at the time, so I couldn't spray paint, so my husband did it for me. And he took the stone spray paint and then he let that dry, painted it black, and then let that dry, and then added one final stone coat on top. And then I melted the candles down. I poured the wax into this pitcher. This is just to make it easier to pour it. That's the only reason why I do that. I would say this is another project that you guys have recreated a lot, and you've shared with me on Instagram, which I think is great. The first person I saw do it was Erica from Peony and Honey, which is why I wanted to share it in this video again. And you should also go check her out. She's amazing. Project 83 brings me to my pickle jar vase. So I had this huge pickle jar. We ate all the pickles and I'm left with this really beautiful glass jar. And if you don't have one that looks quite like this, I got this one at a farmer's market, but this one is the one that you can find at your grocery store. We also buy those too. We love pickles in our house. And all I did was I took Magnolia Homes yarn spray paint and I spray painted it inside and outside a few times, added a small glass jar on the inside, and I added some water to that, added some fresh florals, and there you have it, some really beautiful statement decor that I spent $0 to make. Next up is the trivet mirror using an IKEA trivet that I found in the as is section. So I believe I chose the biggest of the three, and I'm basically going to take a Dollar Tree mirror and I'm going to place it on the inside. But first I wanted to just jazz it up a little bit, so I decided to paint the cork black, and then I just speckled some white acrylic paint on top. And once the paint had dried on the trivet, it was time now to just add the mirror. So I just added lots of hot glue in between the mirror and the trivet to make sure that it wouldn't fall out or break. And when it came time to hang it, I decided to grab some of these screw eyes and I just screwed those in on either side at the top. And then I just grabbed a Dollar Tree chain. I kind of wish I would have used something else. I feel like the scale's off. I feel like the chain's way too big for that little mirror. So if I were to do this project today, I'd probably use like a necklace or something like that, something that's a little bit more delicate. But overall, I think the idea is definitely there, a very fun little memo mirror project. Project number 85 brings me to the faux concrete side table. If you can't tell by now, I love things that are concrete or stone-like. So I had found this coffee table on the side of the road, and it is from IKEA. It's their IKEA lac table. So I first took that same paint that I used for the shoe cabinet and applied it all over this tabletop. And then I took some white paint, some terracotta paint, and some black paint. And I basically just kind of like mixed those all together with a damp paper towel until I felt like I was able to really achieve the look of like faux stone or faux concrete. Something that I kept referring to was I just had an image of a concrete side table on my phone, so I kind of like knew the look I was going for. Now the legs from that table on the side of the road were completely busted, so I ended up ordering these hairpin legs off of Amazon that I will link in the description box below. And I love this project. I think it's a really fun way to kind of get a faux stone look on a budget. For the next project, I made this bubble vase using an old ornament and an end cap from the hardware store. I simply just hot glued that end cap to the bottom of the clear ornament, and I took that outside for a couple quick coats of this anvil gray spray paint, and I topped it off with a copper pipe that I also picked up at the hardware store. If you like modern home decor, I think this would be a nice project for you to try. Number 87 was the floating candle, and a lot of you guys have also recreated this project, which I love. So I had two hurricane vases that were the same size, as well as two candles that were the exact same size, and basically we are just going to make a mirror image on the bottom of what we're doing on top. And just to disguise the section there that you can kind of see the ends of both of the hurricane vases, I took an old leather strap and I just hot glued that strap all around that center section, and that really wrapped up this project. It was definitely a different project. I hadn't seen anybody really do anything like this at the time, so I'm glad that a lot of you guys really enjoyed this one as well. Project number 88 brings me to the rug basket that I made from an IKEA sort so rug. And basically what you'll need to do is just start by taking ugly side facing out, so good sides facing each other. You just want to line up that fringe section, and then you just want to make sure everything is nice and even. I did iron this rug before I did this project, and I'm just going to hot glue all along the sides there. You could opt to sew this if that's your preference, but I decided that hot gluing it would just be faster and easier. And then it was just time now to flip it right side out and kind of just make sure those corners were nice and straightened out. And I flipped that fringe part over, and it was just a cute little basket. I kept baby wipes in here, and it worked out really well. But I think it worked out well because of what I put in there was kind of sturdy and kind of just rectangular shaped. So with project number 89, I did a similar thing using the doormat that IKEA sells, but instead of just gluing it all the way straight down, I ended up just kind of creating this little platform. So I glued about 2/3 of the way down, and then at the bottom, I wanted to make sure it was going to be able to kind of sit upright. And basically what you want to do is just take that fabric and push it up to what you just glued, so it has like a nice perpendicular positioning, so then that way your basket will sit upright and independent. And if I were to do the previous project again, I would definitely do this technique instead. Project number 90 is barely a DIY project, but basically if you're someone like my husband who might have a lot of old trophies collecting dust in a basement or in a closet somewhere, you might want to just take them out and use them as some decor. You know, marble is a really great material to decorate with. So what I like to do is use them as little tapered candle holders. I think that's a really affordable way to kind of get that look for less. So the only thing is when you flip the trophy base upside down, it kind of has like a matte and like unfinished appearance. So you could either paint it with some clear nail polish or just seal it with some acrylic sealer, and I think you have a really beautiful home decor piece that you essentially didn't have to spend any money on. Project 91 has to be the faux wood media cabinet. Of course I have to include it. I feel like this DIY project specifically was almost like a springboard for this DIY channel and why I'm still able to really create for you guys to this day. I had found this IKEA cabinet on the side of the road, and I needed some storage for some tech stuff for YouTube and also just like my printer and things like that. I gave the base of the cabinet 2 coats of black spray paint, and then for the top I had ordered this wood grain contact paper off of Amazon, and I applied that to that top piece. A couple takeaways again with contact paper is you want to just keep working with it, lifting it up if you're noticing a lot of like big wrinkles, but I have a trick if you have some small bubbles, and just taking something that's slatted to kind of just finish up the top section. Now if you have small little bubbles, the best thing to do is just poke it with a needle and just smooth it over. And then when you get to your corners, you want to make sure that what you're going to be seeing face on is your cleanest finish. So just cut 90-degree angles and make sure you're folding everything really well and everything is nice and taut and flat and correct. Because this was a side of the road find and they didn't leave the key with it, I had to get some new hardware. So I ordered this hardware off of Amazon and I just applied it to those keyholes. I needed hardware that was going to be big enough to kind of cover a keyhole versus just like a small little knob. And that is really how this project came together for under $25. I had a really nice looking cabinet to store a lot of things that I didn't really want to see every day, and definitely still one of my favorite projects. Project number 92 is to make a wine bottle wall sconce. So I had this bottle of wine shown here, and it was a bit smaller than like your typical normal wine bottle sizes. And then I had a curtain rod hook that I wasn't actively using, and these just fit together perfectly. So the first thing I did was I just grabbed some brown and black acrylic paint, mixed it with some baking soda, and I painted over the entire bottle. I didn't have to paint the curtain rod hook because it was already black, and then I basically just super glued those together. And to just add to the randomness, I took this puzzle case that my kids have pretty much lost all of the puzzle pieces to at this point, and that became the backing for this project. And it's definitely, like I said, a random sort of thing, but I love how this project turned out. Project number 93 is to make a set of tier trays using these candlestick holders that you can find at IKEA. I also picked up 3 of the Hearth and Hand plates. You can find these at Target right now. I just happened to find mine at a thrift store. And we are just going to stack these on top of these candle holders. I could have done the cork trick, but honestly, I've had such luck with super glue gel that I haven't really needed to. So I just decided to super glue gel those to the center of the plate. And this is essentially how it turns out. You could use this to kind of prop up a plant, or to put candles on them, or to maybe organize jewelry on a dresser or something like that. A really multi-purpose home decor piece that I think could suit a lot of different people. Project number 94 is again to use a trophy vase as part of this project. We're going to take 2 hurricane vases from the Dollar Tree at different heights. We are going to spray paint them in a navy blue color and super glue gel them to the sides now of this trophy holder. I liked this as a little desk organizer a lot, but you could also bring this in a bathroom, do makeup brushes in one side, florals on the other. You kind of get the idea, but I think it's a really chic look on a budget. Number 95 is an IKEA hack, and that is to make a brass cocktail side table. So to start, I had a really tall candlestick that I picked up from the thrift store, as well as 2 saucers from IKEA. I grabbed the larger one and the smaller one. The smaller of the 2 is going to be the bottom, and the top is going to be the larger saucer. And I was inspired by something I saw on Pottery Barn's website charging $149, and I thought we could make something that looks kind of similar for a whole lot less. So I used some E6000 as well as some super glue gel, as well as some hot glue. When it comes to furniture pieces, I'm a little crazy, and I just want to make sure that everything stays really well put, because it would be like the worst thing ever if someone goes to put their drink on your DIY table and it falls apart, right? So I just really like to make sure that everything is really well solidified, and I think every sort of adhesive has like different benefits and cons, right? So hot glue works fast, but it doesn't hold up that well, and E6000 takes a long time to cure, but it holds up really well over time. So I think when you just do a combination of adhesives, you can't go wrong, and I've never had a problem when I've done it this way. So I let that kind of get started curing. I at least want to make sure the hot glue and the super glue gel really were starting to work, and then I did the top piece. And then it was just time for a little bit of spray paint. So I went with this one by Design Master, which is not one that I use frequently, but I needed to have some gold spray paint that had a green undertone, just like the gold candle holder already had. Once everything was covered in the gold spray paint, it was just a little too vibrant for me. So to tone some of that down, I went in with some black metallic spray paint just to kind of distress it a little bit and give it some shadowing. And I really love the way this project turned out. Project number 96 is to make some faux tall floral stems. So to start, I have these 2 potted plants that are faux from IKEA, and I grabbed some 2 large sticks outside. And you can do this with any faux florals or foliage that you might have. So I just started off by removing all of the petals from these faux plants, and then I just hot glued them onto these tall branches, and I just put them in a vase with water. And it's kind of like a good mix between faux and real. The branch is real, but the flowers are fake, and I think you get a really nice look in the end. Project number 97 is the woven basket side table. This was an IKEA hack. I took an IKEA planter in the largest size that they had, and I also had a wooden round that I ordered off Amazon. I painted the inside by hand, and I spray painted the outside in a matte black finish. With the base of the table done, I wanted to just add a small handle to the top of the table just to be able to easily access whatever I was kind of storing on the inside of this little side table. I also decided to paint it black, and I added a hole to the middle Fiddle to add a faux leather strap to it, and that really completed this project. I used to keep my son's smaller stuffed animals in here, and it was a really nice way to have some additional toy storage. Project number 98 was to make a faux eucalyptus wreath, and the Dollar Tree finally did it and started carrying really nice eucalyptus silver dollar stems. And when I saw that, I definitely took it upon myself to collect many of them and decided that I wanted to make this sort of like pretty, just kind of like sweet wreath for the inside of my front door. The first thing I did to this thrifted wire form is I just took that like prong that was hanging out in the middle there off using my hacksaw and pliers, and then I was able to kind of just form these Dollar Tree florals in the shape of almost like a horseshoe. And once I was happy with like the kind of like fullness and the way that it was looking, I started to zip tie them to the wreath form, and then I just removed the excess floral that I wasn't needing. And then I just grabbed some silk ribbon from the Dollar Tree and I just tied that in like a sweet kind of slouchy bow in the middle just to hide the zip ties, and that really finished off this project. For the next project, it was inspired by a home decor piece that I was loving on Anthropologie's website, and I actually saw a creator on TikTok attempt to make it, and that is what inspired this project. To start, I evenly spaced out these PVC pipes and then I just hot glued them down to the glass plate. For the color, I wanted mine to almost resemble clay, so I decided to mix some brown paint with some gray paint and do some baking soda with it to thicken it up a bit, and then I painted over this entire thing twice. Project 100 is the DIY olive tree that I made. So to start, I found 2 of these large planters. I only ended up using one of them. I just gave them a few coats of some black paint, as well as adding that mud mixture on top to distress it quite a bit. With the pot done, now it's just time to work on our tree. So I had thrifted this sort of miniature olive tree that was actually quite full, so I was able to grab a lot of the stems from that as well as Amazon, so I will link those in the description box below. But for the initial structure of the olive tree, I ended up doing the same thing. I grabbed a large branch outside and then I stuck it in with some cement and I let that dry, and then that became kind of the basic structure. Hindsight though, I wish I would have picked a tree branch that had a lot more kind of smaller branches coming out of it, because I think this is what took the most time, was sort of like whittling away at other branches that I have found and then drilling them into my kind of sparse tree just to make it a bit more full. This is a project that I saved to the end because it is super time consuming and there was quite a bit of steps, so I will link the full tutorial in my description box below. Overall though, I had to include it because it is still one of my favorite sort of large scale DIY projects I've ever done, and I know it was a favorite for a lot of you as well. And if you are still here, thank you all so much for watching. I can't believe we've reached 100,000 subscribers, so please don't forget to enter the giveaway. The winners will be announced in next Sunday's video, so be on the lookout for that. And I hope you all have an amazing week ahead, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye.